Okay, so we've already talked about how in a democracy, voters do not have the optimal incentive to become informed about the policies that they are voting on, or at least the candidates that they are voting on. And so as a result, democratic decisions, one would expect, would be suboptimal from a collective point of view, from the point of view of the group of voters, even though each individual decision to remain uninformed or to not vote is perfectly rational, or at least can be perfectly rational. This logic translates actually quite well to Congress, unfortunately, and to the information problems that Congress faces. Now, to talk about this, I'm going to introduce a term of art, a political science term called rational ignorance. Now, rational ignorance is a term that's used to describe the state of individuals who have no good reason to become informed about a subject given their preferences. In other words, it's rational for them not to know and to not seek out that information because the cost of seeking out that information and becoming informed outweighs the benefits. Right? So rational ignorance, it is rational to remain ignorant about any host of topics. And a minute of reflection, I think, should convince you or persuade you that that's in fact the case for a whole range of subjects in your own life. Is it rational for you to become informed about astrophysics? I'm not asking you whether it might be desirable for you to become informed about astrophysics. I'm asking you whether it's rational. Are the costs worth the benefits? Astrophysics is really hard, and do you really plan on using it, or are you going to get any benefit out of using it? It just might be the case that it's not worth knowing, which doesn't mean that someone shouldn't learn it. It just means that you shouldn't, and that's perfectly okay, I think. Now, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, in a democracy and even within Congress, it's rational for us to remain ignorant of public affairs. But in this case, the cost to me of remaining irrational is much lower than the costs of society of my remaining irrational. Hence, it's a collective action problem. So we think about all the things that you might be rationally ignorant about, and there's probably plenty of things that you have no particularly good reason to become informed about. Now, like I said, rational ignorance is not really good or bad in itself. What is individually rational, however, can be collectively irrational. This is a kind of collective action problem or a prisoner's dilemma. Sometimes rational ignorance is a problem, and we are all worse off because of it. I've already suggested the American public, when they vote, is perhaps rationally ignorant, but we all suffer as a result. Now, is rational ignorance a problem for congressmen and women? Yes, absolutely. First of all, the business of Congress is hopelessly impossible for one person to master, even if they were maximally motivated. You would have to be an expert on healthcare, welfare, national security, foreign policy, trade policy, industrial policy, technology policy, constitutional law, environmental policy, labor issues, women's issues, minority issues, ethics, rules of procedure, diplomacy, and probably a whole lot more if you were to be adequately informed, given the stakes, millions, billions of dollars at stake. If you were going to be able to become informed in all of these things, you just don't have time. No congressman has time. Each of these line items here on the slide is something, in some cases, that can be broken down into further subjects, and each of them have academic experts who really are experts on the subject. Right? There are experts on healthcare, but there's also experts on healthcare for disabled people and healthcare for communicable and diseases, and you have experts on the cold and the flu. I mean, the point is that each of these can be broken down, and you still wouldn't reach the level of expertise necessary to make an optimal law on any given subject. So, suffice to say that nobody's going to get all of these topics down. Some congressmen will develop a general familiarity with some of these, but again, becoming an expert in all of these is truly impossible. And, be that as it may be, perhaps you could say, well, our congressmen just do the best they can with the time and the resources they have available to them. And that may be true, but it's worth noting that we do not select our congressmen and women for their expertise. When we vote for congressmen and women, how much of an expert they are on subject matter is just not at the forefront of most voters' mind, right? Politics probably selects people for skills like the ability to speak in public coherently, the ability to persuade people through metaphor and emotional appeal, the ability to campaign effectively, the ability to raise lots of money, and certainly political ideology, right? And so most voters are going to pick their candidates not based on whether they're experts in anything, but whether they have this mix of skills and are able to deploy that mix of skills in an effective way during a political campaign. So actual genuine expertise on public policy or law is just not typically a requirement to become active in politics and indeed get elected to Congress. So, do congressmen and women have an incentive to seek information about all the issues they might have to vote on? Well, no, not by a long shot. Which issues do they have an incentive to become informed about, do you think? And if you think about it for a minute, it should be obvious that the issues that their constituents care about the most, that affect their district the most, are the ones they have a lot of reasons to care about. And then, of course, they have their personal preferences, their personal ideological preferences, which will motivate them to become informed by a few more subjects. But of course, the issues that constituents care about are only going to be a tiny fraction of the issues that Congress faces on any given day. And of course, they don't even necessarily have to be very informed about those issues. They just have to vote the way their constituents prefer, right? So they have to do what their constituents want in order to be reelected, not even necessarily what would be best for their constituents, because their constituents, after all, might be mistaken as well. So information is just not a requirement. Now, what consequences do you think that this problem of rational ignorance has for how well Congress as a whole, as a group, makes decisions? Well, if the group as a whole is not very well informed, even though some individuals in the group might be well informed, the quality of the decisions is likely to be rather poor. Of course, poor quality decisions over the long term hurt the country, but that doesn't mean they're not going to enable an individual to get elected in a particular district, right? If a senator manages to pass, say the senator from Pennsylvania manages to pass a steel tariff, and that will keep him popular in the state of Pennsylvania, which has a lot of steel jobs. That doesn't mean that the steel tariff is good for the country. It just means that it's good for his constituents. Indeed, it looks like the United States consumes, I think, 13 more times steel than it produces. So it's a big steel consumer, but it's not necessarily a big steel producer. So the tariffs are likely on net to hurt more people than they help. But you know what? It's going to get the senator from Pennsylvania reelected. So if the group's not... So over the long term, just because the country gets hurt does not mean that individual politicians will not profit from those decisions. And of course, the people who are voting the congressman in or out might be rationally ignorant of the issues as well, in which case they will not be capable of telling when the congressman is making a mistake, and therefore will not be able to discipline the congressman at the ballot box if they do make a mistake. So how does Congress attempt to remedy this problem? And this seems like a fairly serious problem. If nobody knows much about the issues that are being voted on, or only know about them in a very superficial way, how is policy ever going to get better? How is social progress ever going to occur, or legal progress at the very least going to occur? How is legislation ever going to get better if the level of information is pretty constantly low? Well, one way, and it's not the only way, but one way is that the legislative agenda of the United States is actually broken down into a series of committees, each of which has a chairperson from the majority party, and members from both parties, roughly in proportion to the breakdown of Congress as a whole, sit on these committees. Now, I don't know if you can name any committees, but there's lots of powerful committees out there. The House Ways and Means Committee, for instance, is a big one. And you can think of a ton more. Now, what role do committees play in solving this information problem for Congress, this problem of rational ignorance, which is at its root a collective action problem? Well, by making bills go through committee, the proposed bill ends up being scrutinized by politicians who have an interest in the matter. What happens is that people get assigned to committees based roughly on their interest, or at least the interests of their constituents. So what you get is committees that are much better informed than the chamber as a whole, than Congress as a whole. The committee knows a lot about the issue, Congress not so much. So after the bill gets passed through committee, and committees are a complex process where testimony is sought by lots of people, lots of commentary is sought after, lots of lobbying occurs, but in general the committee seeks out a lot of information. So if there is any relevant information, someone's going to bring it to the attention of the committee. Moreover, the people on the committee are interested in the issue, or experts on the issue, or at least more expert than the people not on the committee. So once the bill finally gets through committee with all the amendments and all the markups, that's what it's called when a bill goes through committee and is amended. The bill is marked up, right? It's modified from its initial version to take into account the commentary and the expertise of the people on the committee. So the bill makes it through committee and then is sent to the floor of the House or sent to the floor of the Senate for a vote. The representatives who vote on that bill that went through committee can be pretty confident the bill is as solid as it's going to get, right? Moreover, if they do feel like doing their jobs and becoming more informed, they can read reports the committee attaches to the bill, reports explaining why the bill should be passed or not passed from the point of view of the majority and the minority on the committee. But putting the bill through a committee ensures that the bill is better than it otherwise would be, right? It's taken into account a lot of the relevant information. It may not be a good bill on balance, it still may not be good, but it's as good as it can be made, right? Because of this process of scrutiny. Now, not all bills make it through committee. Some bills get rejected by the committee because the committee has decided after hearing testimony and after applying their own expertise that the bill wasn't worth passing. Okay, so by applying expertise to the bills that make it to the floor for a vote, the committee system really helps mitigate the rational ignorance of congressmen about issues they don't care about. It generally raises the quality of the legislation compared to what might otherwise be produced if bills just made it to the floor for a general vote without going through this process. It's ironic because the free rider problem in Congress, where nobody really wants to become informed. Everybody wants the benefit of good legislation without doing the work and becoming informed on the legislation. Solving the free rider problem in some sense means empowering some people to solve it for the others or to enable others to free ride, because the congressmen who end up voting on the bills don't know a lot about the bill, but they can be more confident that the bill is, well, better than it otherwise might be because it went through this markup process. So in conclusion, committees help solve a collective action problem in Congress, which is this N-person prisoner's dilemma, this multi-person prisoner's dilemma. Individual representatives have rather little incentive to become informed about most issues that Congress might be called upon to look at. And as a result, the quality of bills passed is going to be lower than optimal. Committees help raise the quality of these bills by making the bills pass through committee, a committee of specially selected experts, or at least interested parties who do have reasons to care about the quality of the bills before the bills get to the floor for a vote and become law. So most representatives do tend to remain rationally ignorant when they vote, but again, at least the bills aren't as bad when they do pass as they otherwise might be.